Well, hi there everyone. Welcome to the channel. I've got another favorites video for you today. This is Thanksgiving week and we have out of town company. I'm not filming anything new, but I thought y'all might enjoy a highlights video. I'm calling this my top 5 soups, but it was really difficult to narrow down this list. I love all my soups. If I didn't, they would not be up on my channel. So I ended up just choosing 5 of my favorites, mostly from my older videos. There were several recipes that didn't make it into this top 5, but they are very similar to the ones that did. Like my beef taco soup is very close to my chicken tortilla soup, and my pasta fagioli is quite similar to my minestrone. So I only put one of each of those in. Please check out my soup playlist for all of these recipes. Coming in at number 5, I have my classic minestrone soup. It's a vegetable soup that's full of Italian flavor. You could definitely add meat to this if you like, but I used all vegetables this time. I hope you enjoy this one. I'm going to start with a quart-sized jar because I want 4 good-sized servings of this minestrone soup today. But if you are only feeding 1 or 2, you could easily scale this recipe down and put it in a pint-sized jar. You can just do the math and scale it down. It doesn't really matter what order you put the ingredients in. I'm kind of just making layers of colors here. So I started with our red beans. If you don't have the Thrive Life red beans, I don't think they sell them anymore. You can use black beans or pinto beans, whatever you have, just so they're the instant beans, the ones that refresh pretty immediately. And then I've got lots of green things, including kale, which, by the way, I love in this, and celery and zucchini. Oh, my word. I love our zucchini, y'all. It tastes so good. And here comes my white layer. I've got potatoes and onions and garlic. Can you tell this is going to taste good? I mean, it's got really yummy ingredients so far, right? Every once in a while, you might give your jar a little shimmy, shimmy, shake, shake, and make sure you settle those ingredients. All right, there goes the pasta. I did 3/4 cup of that ditalini pasta. And then these powders are going to settle into the spaces of the pasta. That mushroom powder is just our Thrive Life mushrooms that I put in the blender and powdered up. I think it gives great flavor without any kind of a weird texture. Some people don't like the texture of mushrooms. Putting tomato powder is the equivalent of putting tomato paste in there. All right, here's the deal with the seasonings. I like to make my own Italian seasonings because I do not like the flavor of dried basil, but I like the flavor of freeze-dried basil. There's a huge difference in flavor, and I just discovered that recently. To me, dried basil tastes bitter, but freeze-dried basil is really nice and sweet. So that's why I like to do the Lighthouse brand of freeze-dried basil. Lots of other good seasonings here. We've got rosemary and thyme and a little bit of oregano. There's that Worcestershire powder. It's just a really nice, deep flavor. It really elevates things in this dish. I recommend it. I just realized that Worcestershire sauce is not actually vegetarian. So let me rethink that. If you're trying to keep this vegetarian, just leave that out. But if not, it's really good. I like to keep the Parmesan separate because I like to add it in later. Oh yeah, and I forgot the bay leaves. Put a couple of bay leaves in there first and then put the baggie of Parmesan and then you're good to go. There's an oxygen absorber if you want to store this for the long term. But of course, I'm not going to do that. I'm about to make this for you. I will show you how easy and simple this is. It cooks up very quickly. Isn't that a pretty jar? Love all the layers of colors. So this is what you could keep on your pantry shelf. With traditional minestrone, the vegetables they use are typically whatever vegetables are in season. That's why minestrone can be different each time it's made. But with Thrive Life, the vegetables are literally always in season because Thrive Life picks their vegetables at the peak of ripeness. They freeze them on the farm. They flash freeze them on the farm, and then they take them to be freeze-dried. So with Thrive Life, you can have minestrone that is in season all year long. And when you're ready to make this, you'll get out a large soup pot. I'm using my Dutch oven. And it's another dump and go recipe. So all you really need to do is set that baggie of Parmesan to the side. We'll put that in later, and dump the contents of the jar into your soup pot, and then add 8 cups of water, at least 8 cups of water. When you see the end product, you'll be able to tell whether or not you want to add more here. I did 8 because I actually like my minestrone really thick, but if you want more broth, just add 9 or 10 cups at the beginning. You'll see what I mean later. Give that a good stir. Just make sure everything is nice and mixed in there. Turn your heat to probably a medium high or so and bring this to a boil. Your kitchen will start to smell really good about right now. Once you bring this to a boil, all you have to do is reduce your heat to probably around a medium. I ended up at a 5 out of 10 on my stove because you want to continue to boil this. You've got pasta in there that needs to cook, as well as the beans that need to rehydrate. So just let it simmer for probably 15 minutes on medium. You'll notice the longer it cooks, the darker the soup will become. So those flavors are just developing in there. The seasonings are really coming to life. Everything just gets better and better. After about 15 minutes, give it a taste and see where you are as far as number 1, seasonings, and number 2, tenderness. Make sure you taste for the carrots, the pasta, and the beans. Those 3 things are the things that will take the longest. And then fish out your bay leaves. And now it's time to add that Parmesan cheese. You can turn off the heat and add the Parmesan. I like to give it a stir, make sure it's incorporated in there. I just cover that. I put a lid on it and cover it and let it stand for about 5 minutes. And during that time, not only will your Parmesan melt, but also the pasta will continue to absorb that yummy flavored broth and everything will thicken up. So this is what I was talking about at the beginning. If this is too thick for you, if you like more broth than that, then probably add 9 or 10 cups of broth at the beginning. All right, it's ready to serve up at this point. And it's just a lovely bowl of soup. But you can make it even better if you will add these things. Now, don't worry if you don't have them, but if you do, just add a few fresh herbs. I am adding fresh basil, fresh rosemary, and fresh thyme. I just have them growing out back in a container. Like I said, don't worry if you don't have those. I'm also sprinkling on some fresh Parmesan, and this is my favorite addition here, olive oil. Give it a drizzle of extra virgin olive oil and a crank of black pepper. I think that right there will help to elevate this soup and just take it over the top. If you'll remember, we didn't really saute anything, right? We didn't saute the vegetables like you usually do when you cook minestrone. So there's no oil in this whatsoever. So I think a little bit of olive oil really elevates this dish. Isn't it beautiful? I just thought it was so pretty. The pasta's great, the beans, the vegetables. It's a fantastic soup, y'all. See how nice and thick it is? And that Parmesan is melted in there. Indeed. That is a good bite of soup right there. Feel free to adjust the seasonings, add more salt if you need it, add more herbs, whatever you like. Make it yours. I really do think including the beef bouillon helps the flavors as well as that Worcestershire powder. Of course, it's up to you. Do what you want to do there. All right, next in the number 4 spot, I've got my creamy and comforting chicken and dumplings. This is a definite favorite around here, especially if the weather is cold and rainy. I think you're really gonna like this one. My mama and my grandma, when they made their homemade chicken and dumplings, they cooked the chicken in a huge pot with a bunch of carrots and onions and celery in the pot. And then when the chicken was tender, they removed the chicken, deboned it, and then got rid of the vegetables. Instead of doing that, what we're going to do is blend those vegetables, make them really small, and include them in the broth. So our vegetables are going to remain in the soup. But in order for it to be kind of smooth and homogeneous like traditional chicken and dumplings, just blend them first and they'll be really tiny. But they're going to give great flavor. Also, to flavor the broth, we'll have some chicken bouillon powder and some butter powder. That's going to lend a yummy richness to it. We'll add half a cup of heavy cream powder and a quarter of a cup of that cream of chicken powder, and the instructions on the back of the bag say to add a tablespoon of cornstarch along with it. So that's what I did. And just season it up with some salt and pepper. Now, this cayenne pepper, just a couple of dashes of cayenne pepper is all you need. It will not make it spicy, but it will deepen the flavor. It kind of rounds out the flavor, and I highly recommend it. This is just a sandwich size baggie, and I'm putting it in there to keep the dumpling dough that's going to go into the baggie, to keep it separate from the chicken and broth mixture. So that's just a little technique I've been using. I put the baggie in the jar and then the canning funnel into the baggie so that all of the dumpling dough ingredients are just going to fall straight into that baggie. These are just normal kind of dumpling ingredients. If you've ever made homemade biscuits or dumpling dough, this is just normal stuff that goes in there. And then I'm adding just a little bit of parsley because I think the green flecks are pretty. And it also kind of makes it just look homemade. You'll go ahead and seal that baggie in there. Because this recipe includes heavy cream powder and the cream of chicken powder and the baking powder, it's not going to be for long-term storage. I'm putting an oxygen absorber in there for just in case, but I don't think you should keep this on your shelf for longer than 6 months. You might want to date your jar, maybe a best if used by date on your jar, along with the cooking instructions when you store this in your pantry. And when you're ready to prepare it, you'll need a couple of things. You'll need a medium-sized bowl or a large bowl that the dumplings are going to be made in. And so just go ahead and put the baggie in that. And you'll also need a large pot, or I used a high-sided skillet, but you're going to need something that will fit quite a bit of liquid. I really like a lot of liquid in my soups. I've told you that before. I added 6, maybe even 6.5 cups of water. If you don't like your soup that liquidy, you could add anywhere between 5 and 5.5 cups of water. Give it a really good stir and get your heat to medium. And while that heats up, we're going to make the dumpling dough. It's very simple. Just empty that baggie into the bowl. Give it a stir because you're wanting to incorporate the flour with the baking powder and the salt and all that. And then add to it 2 tablespoons of softened butter. I think softened butter is just easier to incorporate. This is how biscuits are made. You're just going to slowly but surely, using a fork or using your hands, you can do this however you like, you're incorporating that fat into the flour. It takes a little bit of time, but not too long. I mean, literally just probably within 2 minutes, you are going to have those things combined and you'll have your dumpling dough ready. It just takes a little bit of time and patience, and you're kind of smushing the butter into the flour. you're smushing it against the bottom of the bowl, the sides of the bowl. Eventually, it'll just come together, and this is what it will look like. That did not take me very long, literally just a couple of minutes, and then the dumpling dough is ready. You'll add half a cup of water to it. That's it, just half a cup, and gently stir this together. You don't want to overmix. You want to stir until you have no more streaks of white flour, just until it comes together. And then at that point, just stop. Don't overmix, because then you might end up with a tough dumpling, and nobody wants that. You want soft, pillowy, tender dumplings. All right, meanwhile, the broth mixture is coming up to temperature, and once you get it to a boil, then you are going to be ready to add the dumplings. I'm using a very simple method, the 2-spoon method. With the first spoon, you get about a teaspoonful of dough, and with the second spoon, you push it into the soup. So that's all there is to it. It's very simple. See? Really easy. And you do about a teaspoonful at a time, and you're just kind of dotting the surface of the soup with these little dumplings. You'll end up with, 30 or 40 little dumplings. Once you get it to a boil, cover it and just let that cook. The dumplings will boil in that delicious broth, and they'll kind of steam all the way through, and they're going to cook. Don't lift the lid though. It needs 15 minutes of cook time, no peeking. And at the end, this is what you have. You see how those dumplings have poofed up? They fluffed up and they floated to the surface. Give it a good stir. Let it simmer for another 5 minutes uncovered, and those dumplings will have helped to thicken that broth. Go ahead and give it a taste. Adjust for seasonings. If you put a lot of water in like I did, you might have to give it a little more salt and pepper. But y'all, that's it. Now we have homemade chicken and dumplings from a meal in a jar. This is pretty great. Okay, it's ready to serve up. We got 3 large servings out of this recipe. I think you could get 4 regular size servings, and you could serve this alongside a salad or a vegetable or something like that. But just look at that. You can see the beautiful little flecks of orange carrot and green celery in there, but there's no chunks of vegetables. It's just they're kind of in the background. And the dumplings are there. The chicken is there. And y'all, it's so good. There's lots of different ways to make homemade dumplings, but this one's my favorite. It's just like making a drop biscuit. The dumplings, they do have structure to them. They're not going to fall apart, but they are very tender. And oh, so tasty. In the number 3 spot is my simple Irish stew and soda bread. I did this one for St. Patrick's Day last year, but really, it's good anytime. The bread is a bonus recipe, and it's fantastic. Y'all be sure to give this one a try. I'm starting with just a 1.5 pint jar because I only wanted 2 or 3 servings. We got 3 servings out of this, but I ran out of room in my jar. So I figured out that if you want to include the mushrooms, use a quart jar. Now, mushrooms are not traditional in an Irish stew, but I like them. I like to add them, but they're optional. Start with some beef dices and add some carrots to that. You only need about 3 tablespoons. Our carrots are very sweet and you don't want them to take over the dish. There's a good amount of freeze-dried potatoes in there and just a few onions and some celery to really complement those flavors. Our seasonings are very simple. I've got rosemary and thyme in there. I actually ran out of my dried rosemary. That's fresh rosemary from my garden, but y'all use the dried for your jar. Now, these mushrooms, sadly, they didn't make it into the jar, but I will add them later on in the video. I needed to have room for the sauce powders. I got a snack baggie, and into that I put the tomato powder, some flour, and some beef bouillon, as well as some Espanol sauce. Now, if you don't have our Espanol sauce, you can leave that out. Or better yet, I have a copycat recipe for that on my channel, and I'll link to that below. So seal up that bag and put that in the top of your jar. I'll include a couple of bay leaves. Here's the oxygen absorber. But how about that? That's a really nice jar, isn't it? Beautiful layers. So this is what you would store on your pantry shelf. I just love having meals like this waiting for me in my pantry. It is so convenient for our busy lives. Also, I love cooking with freeze-dried food because once you open a can of those potatoes or a can of that beef or the carrots, you have an entire year to use up the contents of the can. So it has really helped me eliminate food waste in our home. And when you would like to prepare this, just get out a large soup pot. Go ahead and remove those bay leaves. We'll add those back in a minute. And set that baggie to the side. Empty the contents of your jar into your soup pot. There go those mushrooms. And then just start with 1.5 cups of water. Now you might be thinking, Kareth, that's not enough water to refresh these ingredients and get the beef tender. And you'd be right, that is not enough water. All I'm doing here really is I'm hydrating those vegetables just a little bit so that I can saute them without burning them. I'm trying to build flavors here, so I figured out that I can get really great flavor with these ingredients if I saute them first. So that 1.5 cups of water, you'll bring it to a boil, and it doesn't need to cook but for maybe 4 or 5 minutes, and that water will evaporate off and you'll pretty much have a dry pan at this point. But those veggies will have absorbed enough water to where you can saute them and they won't burn on you. I'm going to use some avocado oil here. I started with 2 tablespoons and I ended up adding 1/3 later on. I like avocado oil because number 1, it's neutral flavored, and number 2, it's got a high smoke point. To that, you're going to add that baggie of powders, and what we're doing here is we're sauteing or toasting that flour and that tomato powder. Raw flour does not taste good. You don't want to have raw flour in your sauce. But if you toast that flour in the oil, you're going to have wonderfully flavored sauce. So after you kind of get that tomato powder and that flour absorbed in that oil, you can just kind of combine everything. And it will start to saute. Now you're going to develop some fond on the bottom of your pot, and that's great. That's wonderful. Don't worry about it. It will come up whenever we add some liquid to the pot. That is going to give your dish fantastic flavor. And you don't need to saute that very long, maybe 5 or 6 minutes, something like that. You'll be smelling some wonderful aromas in your kitchen. And you can go ahead and add about 3 cups of water. Now, if you would like to substitute a cup of stout or Guinness in here, you can do that. Be sure to scrape up the fond off of the bottom of the pot. You want all those bits in your sauce, right? It will give your broth great flavor. So go ahead and cover that and bring it up to a boil. Don't forget your bay leaves like I did. cover that and turn down your heat and simmer it for about 15 minutes. After that time, you can remove the lid and continue to simmer for an additional 15 minutes. I just came along and gave it a stir every probably 5 minutes or so. It's not fussy, it doesn't really stick to the bottom, and after a while you'll notice that the sauce color has deepened and it gets really nice and glossy. Go ahead and give it a taste. If you'll remember, I didn't add any salt and pepper at the beginning, mainly because that beef bouillon has some salt in it, but I think it does need some salt, so just do that to taste. I probably added about 1/4 teaspoon. Go ahead and fish out your bay leaves and it's ready to serve up. Just look at that wonderful stew. You'll be amazed at how tender the beef dices get when you cook them long enough. Those carrots are perfect, the potatoes are great. It's just a wonderful stew. And our favorite thing to serve this with is a good Irish soda bread with copious amounts of Kerrygold butter on it. That's just the way you do it. So isn't that beautiful? Now, because Thrive Life beef dices are kind of small and the potatoes are small and the carrots are small, you don't get those good big chunks that you usually see in an Irish stew, but you are going to get that same wonderful flavor. And I thought, I'm showing you this beautiful stew that we only ever eat with our Irish soda bread. And I thought, it's kind of mean to show you the stew and the bread and not give you the recipe. So I decided, all right, I'll film this and show everybody how I make my soda bread. Now, I've made both gluten-free and regular all-purpose soda bread. Both of them always work. This is not a difficult bread. There's no kneading, there's no proofing. The soda is what makes it rise. So let me show you. This is my mom's recipe, and I'm going to go ahead and put it in a jar to show you that you could store this next to your stew. You could store your soda bread in the pantry next to your stew. So anytime you want to make the stew, you could just get out a jar of the soda bread as well and have them together. Very simple ingredients. This is exactly my mom's recipe. She used both soda and baking powder in her recipe, and that acts as the leavening agent. She also put a little bit of egg in hers, and I think it helps with the structure and with the rise a little bit. So that is what you could store on your pantry shelf. And let me show you how to put it together. It's very easy. Dump your ingredients into a bowl. That's a large bowl. That was my Mama Helen's bowl, my favorite bowl. Stir your ingredients a little bit to combine them. And if you're using a gluten-free flour like I am here, it's 1 cup of water. If you're using all-purpose regular flour, it's 3/4 cup of water. That's the only difference in the recipe. The rest of it's exactly the same. And that's all there is to it. You stir it together and you're going to let it sit while you preheat your oven. Gluten-free flour needs to hydrate a little bit. So when your oven is ready, flour your surface and turn your dough to get all sides of it floured, just so you can handle it really. And all you have to do is shape it into a kind of a circle. That's it. There's no kneading. I just plopped it on some parchment paper in the shape of a circle, that's all. You have to cut into it, you have to cut across, and that really helps the bread cook evenly on the inside. And then you cut the fairy holes. And that's going to ensure an even bake. Put the parchment paper into the Dutch oven or just any container that has a lid. And it needs to bake at 425 for about 25 minutes with the lid on. and then about 15 minutes with the lid off. And that's what you have at the end of your cook time. That parchment paper acts as a sleeve and you can carefully lift it out. Let it cool until you can handle it. It's a really nice crust. So it's got a great crusty outside and a really tender inside. If you haven't tried soda bread, I hope you will give this a try. It's almost a no-fail recipe. It's super easy. Just look at that. Isn't it beautiful? It's a nice tender crumb. So I wanted to show you just kind of a close-up of what these slices look like. Lovely crust. And then watch how tender this is. It's nice and moist. It's a tight crumb, but it is not tough. And yes, like I said, copious amounts of salted Kerrygold butter. This is how you have to eat it. It's so good. I hope you'll give this a try. And please let me know what you think in the comments. All right, let's get back to the stew. I sometimes pile stew on my bread and eat it like that. And then sometimes I dunk the bread in the stew or tear off chunks of bread and put it in the stew. Any way you want to do it's great, but those two things pair so well together. They really do belong together. So there you have it, guys. My Irish stew with my Irish soda bread. And if you've made it this long, please let me know in the comments. Do y'all make Irish soda bread? And do you put baking powder and baking soda in yours? My mom always did, so that's how I make it. But I've seen some people make it without the egg, some people make it without the sugar, and without the baking powder. I think there's probably only 4 or 5 ingredients that you have to have in there to make it an Irish soda bread. I know a lot of people will put raisins or currants in there to do kind of a sweet version. Oh, and just to compare, can you tell a difference between the regular flour and the gluten-free? Because I can't hardly tell a difference. They are practically identical in flavor and texture. Gluten-free is on the right here. Thrive Life has the best gluten-free flour blend I have ever used. We have family members with celiac disease, so I have tried so many different gluten-free flours. Bob's Red Mill, King Arthur, our local H-E-B, the 1-to-1. Nothing compares to Thrive Life gluten-free flour. It's crazy. It's so good. Once you use it, you're not going to want to go back, so y'all give that a try. Our runner-up recipe is my chicken tortilla soup. This is actually the soup I make for when I do tastings at someone's house, because everyone around here loves tortilla soup and it's just that good. This is obviously a very old video, but the recipe is a keeper. It's mildly spicy, but not too spicy, and that amount can be adjusted up or down with the addition of freeze-dried jalapenos and or cayenne pepper. I love that it's creamy and cheesy. And it has enough black beans and chicken in it to leave you really satisfied. The recipe is very close to my taco soup that has ground beef in it. As with all of my recipes, if you don't have some of the ingredients in freeze-dried form, you can always add in fresh when you prepare it. For instance, if you don't have instant black beans, just keep a can of black beans stored next to your jar and use those instead. I'll put the recipes for all of these soups in the description box below this video. They're also all included in my cookbook. This recipe in particular makes a wonderful gift because all you really need to do is add water, simmer for about 20 minutes, and then your soup is ready. I also like to give this to people when they're recovering from surgery or just had a baby, or they might just need a meal. Well, here's my number one recipe. My chuck wagon chili. It's popular for a reason. It's everything you expect in a chili recipe from a Texan. Rich and hearty, bold in flavor, somewhat spicy, and really delicious. I'm going to use a quart-sized jar for 4 servings, but of course you could cut this in half if you are just feeding 1 or 2. Cut all the ingredients in half, put it in a pint-sized jar. I'm going to start with 3/4 of a cup of our Thrive Life beef dices, so we'll have some good chunky beef in there. And then also 3/4 of a cup of our ground beef. I always pulse it in the blender because I like the texture better. I'm adding 2 kinds of instant beans here. I've got red beans, pinto beans, but they're instant. That's very important. You could also use black beans. I'm adding some celery that I had pulsed in the blender or crushed in a baggie. And there are some green chilies as well as some green bell peppers. I snapped those in half because they are slices to start with. That's a little bit too big, so I snapped them in half. In goes a cup of our tomato dices. That's a good amount of tomatoes in here. I mean, this is chili, you need tomatoes, right? Now, I'm going to talk about some of these seasonings, but not all of them. The chili powder, I think it actually does matter the brand you use. I actually use Gebhardt brand. It's a Texas brand, and they use a variety of chili peppers in it. Tomato powder is super important here because that's the equivalent of adding like a can of tomato sauce or some tomato paste to your chili. The vinegar powder it's great in there, but don't worry if you don't have it. Just leave it out. It's not that big of a deal. I do like the brightness of flavor that it brings. Okay, cocoa powder. You're going to be like, Kareth, cocoa powder? Yes, cocoa powder, believe me, doesn't make your chili taste like chocolate. It just makes everything more intense. It's very good in here. All right, be careful about the cayenne pepper, especially if you're using a chili powder that has quite a bit of spice to it. I like a little bit of extra spice in my chili, so I'm adding some cayenne. Of course, you can cut that out, depends on your spice level. I love the Lighthouse brand red onions. They're so good. But guys, if you don't have those, don't worry. You could just use all Thrive Life chopped onions. Now, I actually have a little bit of extra room in the top of my jar here, and I'm going to add some extra ingredients to the skillet as I make it. You can put them in this jar. It will fit if you think, yeah, I want to put that in there. It will fit in the jar. I'm just going to show you, this is the basic version, and I'm going to show you a couple of optional ingredients to kick it up another notch, like Emerald used to say. Okay, so when you're ready to make this, you'll get out a large skillet or a large pot. I think this is a great meal to take with you if you're going camping because you just need a pot. You pour the ingredients in here, add water, simmer it, and then that's it. I mean, it's really great. We would make this when we were camping, and my girls like to eat chili with Fritos, so we would make Frito pies. All right, 5 cups of water is what you're going to add to this. Or you could add about 3 cups of water and a can of beer. So we've done this in the past and it's really, really good. Most of the alcohol is going to cook off and you're just going to be left with the flavor that actually pairs really nicely with the spices in chili. you need to bring this to a boil. So I put this at a medium high and then I brought it to a boil. Then you're just going to stir it one more time and then reduce that heat down to about a medium low. I ended up at a 3.5 out of 10 on my stove. You need to simmer this for 20 minutes. Optional ingredient number 1 are refried beans. Guys, okay, so this is just adding more beans to your chili. I put about half a cup in there total. And not only does this thicken up your chili, but it also just adds some more great flavor and some more protein to your chili. Optional ingredient number 2 is a tablespoon of that pourable brown sugar. Now, you've got a lot of acidity in this dish, okay? The tomatoes, you've got 2 kinds of tomatoes, diced tomatoes and tomato powder. They're very acidic. So if you balance that out with some sweetness like brown sugar, it's gonna make your chili so much better. So you do need to simmer this for about 20 minutes, stir it occasionally. After 20, give it a taste and adjust. I didn't change a thing, mine was perfect. I let that sit on the stove for about 10 minutes while I was doing something with my dog. Can you see how much it has thickened up? That thickened up quite a bit in just 10 minutes. It's crazy. I like to serve this with shredded cheese, and then I just got some cilantro and some green onions from my container garden out back. But it's great also with sour cream. We like to serve this chuck wagon chili with cornbread. It's fantastic with cornbread. I've got a recipe for cornbread mix in a jar. I will link that below. I will also put my full recipe and my shopping link below for any of you who might want to pick up some of these ingredients. Y'all, I oftentimes get so excited telling you about the recipes I've developed that I forget to talk about the food itself. So yeah, I do sell Thrive Life Foods, which is now the largest freeze-dried food company in the world. And they maintain very high quality standards. All their foods are non-GMO, just delicious, simple, clean food. Yeah, so that was a fantastic bite. I love chili. We sometimes even make this in the summertime. We just get a hankering for chili and make in the summer. All right, this is my kids' favorite way to eat this. They'll grab just a little bag of Fritos, and we make this like a walk-in taco. Have y'all ever had walk-in tacos? We make a walk-in Frito pie, okay? So you just put the chili directly into that bag, and then you can top it with whatever you want to top it with. My girls like it with cheese, just cheese, that's it. So Fritos, chili, and cheese. But I like to put, green onions in there and cilantro, and sometimes I'll mix in some sour cream as well. But it is a fantastic little dinner on the go. They'll take that into the family room and then turn on a show and watch TV while they eat. So this makes it ideal for going camping, I think, because you can just bring some chips, bring some plastic spoons, and make your chili, and then you don't even have any dishes really to do afterwards except for the chili pan. So it's really ideal for camping. It's ideal for if you're RVing. You could make this in a Mylar bag instead of a quart jar. Either way, it's just so good. You will not regret making this dish. I think you'll love it. We love it. I hope you do too. All right. Now, if you'd like to have these recipes in written form, I'll include my website link below where you can purchase my ebook. It's 112 pages of meal in a jar recipes from my YouTube channel. You can download it to multiple devices and then print off any recipes you're interested in. It's got beautiful pictures and people are really loving it. Be sure to hit the like button if you enjoy my content. And leave me a comment below and let me know your favorite soup or stew recipe from my channel. Well, thank y'all so much for watching. I so appreciate you. I hope you have a happy Thanksgiving. And until next time, y'all take care and keep thriving.